The morning I walked into that courthouse, my stomach was hollow, and I was ready to hand over the keys to my entire life. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I was 35 when the marriage I'd built for over a decade turned into a battlefield. My husband Marcus didn't just want a divorce. He wanted the house on Hemlock Lane, the accounting practice with my name above the door. And, most brutally, he wanted our 2 children, Lily and Sam. He wanted the whole town to watch him take it all. His mother, Patricia, had spent weeks making the rounds at our church and the local diner, painting me as a heartless woman who had driven her perfect son astray. I heard the whispers in the grocery store and saw the pitying looks at the school pickup line. Eventually, I just stopped trying to correct anyone. The truth was a heavy coat, and I was tired of wearing it in public. Then, moments before the courtroom doors swung open, my mother, June, leaned in close. Her whisper was so soft, it was almost lost in the clatter of the old heating pipes, but the words hit me like a physical blow. It took me a moment to process what she'd said. 3 months later, the entire Vance family would have done anything to read the fine print of what they'd so eagerly won. Welcome back to Mind Unveiled Stories, where we share quiet, powerful narratives about people who maintain their grace when those closest to them decide to turn. No screaming matches or elaborate schemes, just the steady strength of knowing your own worth, even when the world seems to disagree. If that sounds like your kind of story, please leave a comment below and subscribe. It took me a long time to feel ready to tell this one. 12 years ago, I started my business on a creaky folding table in our garage. I had one client, a local hardware store, and a second-hand calculator with a sticky 8 key that I had to pound to make work. I balanced the books for a diner, then a dentist, then a feed supply. One by one, the small businesses in our town of Oakhaven started trusting me with their shoeboxes of receipts and their quiet anxieties about the tax man. By the time I hit 30, Vance Accounting had a real office on Main Street. It had a waiting area, 2 desks, and a glass door with my name etched in gold leaf. I still kept the original key from the garage on my ring, its brass surface worn smooth from years of turning the lock at 5:45 in the morning. People in Oakhaven thought they had me all figured out. They saw the office and my late father's sterling reputation, and they assumed I was sitting on a pile of cash. They couldn't see how thin the margins really were, or how many hours I gave away for free, helping families fix their tax mistakes because I couldn't bear to watch them lose everything over a simple accounting error. That was my life. I was the fixer, the one everyone leaned on, the friend who spotted fraud before the bank did. The wife who balanced the household and the business without ever asking for the same in return. I was so good at carrying the weight that nobody, including me, ever asked what it was costing me. I told myself it was strength. It took a courtroom and a cheating husband to realize it was also the very thing they were using as a weapon against me. Marcus Vance was charming in that salesman way. He could make you feel like you were the only person in the room, only to forget your name the moment you walked away. I married him when I was 24. He sold industrial equipment across 3 counties, and for a long time we were content. The cracks started to show 3 years before the divorce, when one of his side ventures collapsed. He'd sunk our savings and a significant amount of borrowed money into a partnership with a man who was practically a ghost. When the bills came due, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, pale and defeated. So, I did what I always did. I moved money from the business, quietly, legally, and cleanly, to make the problem vanish before it could touch his credit or his pride. I thought I was protecting him. What I got instead was a slow, simmering resentment. A man like Marcus can forgive almost anything except being rescued by his wife. He started making comments, cloaked as jokes. You always have to fix everything, don't you? Or must be nice being the smart one. I would laugh it off, trying to reach for his hand, but the warmth was gone. He'd decided somewhere in that humiliation that my competence was a form of control, that every spreadsheet was a leash. He never said thank you. He just started keeping score. Looking back, that was the night the marriage ended. I just kept the books open for 3 more years, trying to balance something that had already gone bankrupt. The signs were mundane, which is how they fool you. Late meetings that grew later, a new cologne I'd never bought him, his phone, always face down, buzzing on the nightstand like a trapped insect. I want to be clear, I never snooped, I never planted a recorder or read his messages. I've spent my career keeping other people's secrets, and I know the difference between vigilance and invasion. I just noticed things, the way you notice a leak by the stain on the ceiling long before you find the burst pipe. The name that kept surfacing was Claire Westbrook. She was the real estate agent who'd sold us our house on Hemlock Lane. Polished, pretty, and always conveniently showing up at the same gas station, the same coffee shop, the same charity walk. I told myself I was imagining things. Then, one afternoon, Marcus's phone lit up on the counter while he was in the shower. A single message slid across the screen before I could look away. It wasn't a love note, it was calculating. It said, find out what her father actually left her. Not I miss you, not I love you, just a cold, strategic question about my inheritance from a woman who already knew what color our kitchen curtains were. I stood in my own kitchen and understood that whatever this was, it had stopped being a marriage a long time ago. It was a project. Somewhere out there, 2 people were doing math on my life, my house, my father's legacy, while I was still pretending the marriage could be salvaged. They had started counting. So had I. Here is what I stood to lose. The house on Hemlock Lane where Lily took her first steps and Sam lost his first tooth. The business with my name on the door, the only thing I had ever built alone. My standing in a town small enough that the woman who bags your groceries also sits in the pew behind you on Sunday. And the trust of 2 children, 9 and 7, who still thought their parents were a team. That was the real ledger, the one that doesn't balance in dollars. But there was one more thing, and it was the thing that mattered most, without anyone knowing it yet. When my father Walter died 5 years before, he left me a significant sum, around $180,000, plus a parcel of land outside town. My father had been a bookkeeper too, and he had been burned early by a partner who left him with nothing. He taught me one rule before I could drive. Money has a memory, he'd say. If you let it, keep one. He meant keep what's yours separate. Document its origin. Never let your accounts blur with someone else's. When his money came to me, I followed that rule exactly. A single account, my name only, untouched by anything marital. Every deposit documented in the same green ledger he'd handed me at 16, his blocky handwriting still in the margins, a single word. Traceable. I had followed that one rule my whole life without ever needing it. I didn't yet know it was about to become the only wall standing between me and losing everything else. Marcus didn't tell me he was leaving. He had his lawyer tell me. The papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered to my office, so the whole street could watch the process server walk in. I read them at my desk with the door closed. He wasn't just asking for a divorce. He wanted the house. He wanted an equitable share of the marital business. A polite legal term meaning he wanted half of Vance Accounting, the thing he'd never stepped foot in except to ask for money. And he wanted primary custody of Lily and Sam. The lawyer was Walter Vance, Marcus's cousin on his mother's side. That told me everything about whose idea this was. The letter demanded I submit my company to a formal valuation as a marital asset. I sat very still, feeling the floor tilt. Then, I did the only thing I know how to do when the numbers don't make sense. I called a professional. Matilda Cowrie came recommended by a client I'd helped years ago. She had a calm, dry way of talking that I immediately trusted. Within 10 minutes, I laid it all out. The affair, the house, the business, the kids. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in careful handwriting. When I finished, she didn't try to comfort me. She asked a single question, quiet and precise, and the way she asked it made my stomach drop. "Eleanor," she said, "did you ever put your inheritance into a joint account?" I realized in that pause that she already understood the whole game. Everything Marcus wanted was resting on the answer to that one question. I held my breath before I answered, because I knew the answer mattered more than anything I'd say in court. "Never," I told her. "Not once." My father's voice was in the room with me when I said it. The inheritance had always lived in its own account, in my name only, never blended with a single marital dollar. The business was a single-member LLC I'd formed before Marcus and I were even serious, with its own books, its own tax filings, its own clean ownership line going back 12 years. Matilda set down her pen. "Then they're chasing ghosts," she said. "Under our state law, an inheritance kept separate and traceable stays yours. Same with a business you owned before the marriage, if you can prove it was never commingled." I felt something loosen in my chest for just a second. Then she leaned forward. "But Eleanor, here's the part you won't like. The law being on your side doesn't mean the fight is easy. The burden is on you to prove every dollar's path with documents. Their whole strategy is to bet that you got sloppy somewhere over 12 years, and while they bet, they'll make you bleed. Legal fees, delays, pressure." I nodded slowly, understanding, "and the town." Matilda's mouth tightened. "The town isn't a courtroom. The law can't make people like you." That was the real problem, and we both knew it. The paperwork was solid. My father had made sure of that before I was old enough to understand why. The problem wasn't going to be the law. The problem was that Patricia Vance had already stood up in front of half of Oakhaven and delivered her verdict, and people had clapped. I walked out to my car with Matilda's words sitting heavy on me. I had the truth and the records. What I didn't have was a single neighbor who believed I'd need them. Patricia Vance never raised her voice. She didn't have to. She was 64, silver-haired, the kind of woman who brought a homemade casserole to every funeral and remembered your children's birthdays. And when a woman like that lowers her voice in the church kitchen, people lean in. I learned the shape of it secondhand, the way you always do. She told them I was cold. She told them I'd kept Marcus on an allowance, that I'd hidden money for years, that no wonder the poor man looked elsewhere when his own wife treated him like an employee. She never said a fair. She had a gift for letting other people draw the cruelest conclusions, so her hands stayed clean. Within 2 weeks, conversation stopped when I entered a room. A woman I'd done taxes for at cost crossed the street rather than say hello. Claire, meanwhile, had stopped hiding. She showed up at Marcus's side at a high school football game, at the hardware store, At a restaurant where she laughed too loudly 2 tables over and let her hand rest on his arm where the whole room could see. She was already acting like the next Mrs. Vance, already measuring my life for new drapes. And the worst part, the part that hollowed me out, was how alone it felt. I had spent 12 years being the person everyone trusted with their secrets and their money. Now that I was the one being robbed, nobody could see it. Here's the thing nobody tells you. The woman who's good with money is the last person anyone believes is being taken. They look at the competent one and cannot imagine her as a victim. So they don't. They just wonder what she did to deserve it. Then, Marcus did the thing I could not forgive. He used the kids as leverage. He'd never been the parent who knew the pediatrician's number or which one hated crusts. Suddenly, he was Disneyland Dad, showing up with a new bike for Sam, promising Lily a horse. A horse. He told them, in the careless way weak men do, that maybe they'd all live together in a way better house soon. He let them believe their mother was the obstacle. I found out when Lily came home quiet and asked, in that small, careful voice kids use when they've heard something they shouldn't, "Mom, are we poor now?" I knelt down on the kitchen floor so we were eye to eye. I did not cry, and I did not say one word against their father, because I had decided early that whatever he did, my children would never hear me tear down half of who they were. But I made myself a promise right there on the linoleum. I called Matilda that night and asked her how to protect them properly. The next morning, we requested a guardian ad litem, a neutral person whose only job is to look out for the children's actual interests. I kept their school the same, their bedtimes the same, their soccer schedule the same. Stability, Matilda told me, is its own kind of evidence. While Marcus offered ponies, I offered the same dinner at 6 and the same lamp left on in the hallway. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in a current, holding 2 small hands, refusing to let go while someone tried to pull them downstream with toys. "Mom," Lily asked again at bedtime. "We're okay, right?" I tucked the blanket under her chin. "We're okay," I said. And for the first time, I made myself believe it could be true. The Oakhaven Fall fundraiser is a fixture, folding tables and casseroles in the church basement, the whole town in one room. I almost didn't go, but running would have been its own kind of confession. And I don't run. I wore a plain navy dress and held my paper plate and made small talk. I felt the eyes the whole time, the prickle on the back of my neck that tells me you're being discussed while standing right there. Patricia held court at the center table, with Marcus beside her and Claire brazenly 2 seats down. I was getting coffee when Patricia's voice carried across the room, pitched just loud enough, sweet as the pie in front of her. Someone had asked with false concern how poor Eleanor was holding up. Patricia smiled and said it like a kindness. "Oh, she'll land on her feet. Though I expect she'll be lucky to keep her maiden name." The table laughed. Not cruelly, exactly, worse than cruel. Comfortably, they laughed the easy laugh of people who have already decided the joke is fair. I set my coffee cup down on the table without a sound. I did not turn around. I did not give them the scene they were half hoping for. The flushed face, the shaking voice, the proof of everything Patricia had told them. I picked up my purse and walked out into the cold parking lot. The gravel crunched under my flats. I got in my car. I did not cry. I want you to understand that because it surprised even me. I sat in the dark, with my hands on the wheel, and instead of weeping, I reached into my purse, found a pen and an old receipt, and started making a list. The list grew. I'm a bookkeeper, so when my life falls apart, I audited it. And in auditing it, I found the thing that changed the entire shape of the war. I pulled our joint mortgage records, the ones I had every legal right to see, and I found that Marcus had quietly refinanced the house on Hemlock Lane 4 months before he filed, taking out a home equity line of credit. He had drained nearly every dollar of equity we'd built in 12 years. The money hadn't gone into a savings account. It had gone into a new investment, a property flipping venture with Claire Westbrook listed as a partner. Worse, to get the business loan that funded it, Marcus had signed a personal guarantee, putting his own name on the hook for the whole debt. I sat in my office with the green lamp on and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger. Clarity. The moment I'd seen the refinance go through weeks earlier, I had called the bank to try to stop it. But it was a joint mortgage on a marital home. It takes 2 signatures to freeze, and only 1 to borrow against. There was nothing I could legally do but watch and write it all down. So I did. I documented every statement, every transfer, every date, the same way my father taught me, the same way I'd done my whole career. And as the picture filled in, I understood something Marcus clearly didn't. He thought he was loading himself up with assets. What he was actually loading himself up with was liabilities. He was fighting to win a pile of debt with his own name guaranteeing it. He just hadn't read his own paperwork closely enough to know it yet. Walter Vance earned his fee by making my life expensive. That's the strategy. When the law isn't on your side, you can't win, so you try to make the other person too tired and too broke to keep standing. He filed motions. He demanded the business valuation again. Then again, he pushed for temporary spousal support to be paid by me, the supposedly hidden rich wife, to Marcus, the supposedly wronged husband. Every letter cost me an answer, and every answer cost me money I'd rather have spent on my kids. There were nights I sat at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. with the green ledger open and my father's handwriting in the margins, wondering if being right was worth this much. Matilda kept me steady. "We don't fight loud," she told me on the phone more than once. "We fight on paper. Loud loses, paper wins." I held on to that like a railing. I kept showing up to my clients, kept the office open, kept Lily's hair in 2 even braids before school. Even on the mornings my hands wanted to shake. I was exhausted in a way that doesn't show. The quiet kind. The kind that lives behind a calm face. And I want to stop here for a second because I know some of you watching are nodding. If you've ever been the person everyone leans on, the one who solves it for everybody else, the one nobody ever thinks to ask whether she's okay, then you know exactly how silent that kind of tired is. You've carried it too. If this is hitting close to home for you tonight, do me a favor and leave a comment that just says "I see her" so I know you're out there. And subscribe so the next part doesn't slip past you. Because the next morning, I drove to the bank and I picked up the one thing that ended it all. There's a difference between knowing you're right and being able to prove it. My father spent my whole childhood drilling that difference into me. So, I went and got the proof, all of it, in one place. I drove to the bank where my inheritance account had lived untouched for 5 years, and I requested a certified deposit history, the official kind with the bank's seal, showing every dollar's arrival and that nothing marital had ever flowed in or out. Then I drove to the office of my father's old attorney, who still kept Walter's probate file in a cabinet, and I had certified copies made of the will, the estate distribution, the deed to the parcel of land. From my own records, I pulled the LLC formation documents for Vance Accounting, dated and filed before Marcus and I married, along with 12 years of separate business tax returns. I put it all into one folder, thick as a phone book, and I drove to my mother's house and laid it on her kitchen table. June, my mom, 63 and sharp as a tack, looked at the folder, and then at me. I opened the green ledger beside it and turned to the page where my father's blocky hand had written years ago. The dates of those very deposits, the word separate in the margin, traceable beneath it. The bank's certified dates matched his handwriting exactly. The thread ran unbroken from his hand to mine. I had everything, every document, every date, every signature, the complete, sealed, unbreakable record that the company and the inheritance had never, not once in 12 years, become anyone's but mine. My mother put her hand flat on the folder and was quiet a long moment. Then she said something I didn't fully understand yet. You know, she said softly, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let them carry the load they fought so hard for. I closed the folder like closing a door. I thought she meant comfort. She meant strategy. I just couldn't hear it yet. I ran into Claire in the grocery store parking lot on a gray afternoon, both of us reaching for the same cart corral. There was no graceful way to avoid it. Up close, without the performance, she looked older than her 45 years, tired in the eyes. For a second, neither of us played a part. "You think I'm the villain," she said, not unkindly. I didn't answer. She loaded her bags, and then quietly, almost to herself, she said, "You don't know what it is to be my age with nothing." Twice I walked away with nothing. And for just a moment, I did see her. A woman who had bet on 2 marriages and lost both, who had watched her settlements evaporate, who had decided somewhere along the line that the only thing that wouldn't leave her was an asset with her name on it. I understood the fear. I'd seen it in clients, the panic of someone who runs the numbers on their own old age and comes up short. For one breath, I almost felt sorry for her. Then she straightened, slid back into the roll like a coat, and the softness was gone. "The house is practically mine already," she said with a small, cold smile. "Marcus says the curtains can go. I never liked them anyway." And there it was. She had stood in my home, the one where my daughter learned to walk, and picked out which of my things to throw away. Whatever sympathy I'd felt folded itself up and went quiet. I wheeled my cart to my car. I didn't hate her. Hate takes energy I didn't have. But I stopped right then, mistaking her fear for an excuse. People can be frightened and still choose to be cruel. Claire had made that choice with her eyes open. I'd let her keep it. That weekend, my mother told me a story about my father I'd never heard. We were doing dishes at her sink, the kids asleep in the next room, and she handed me a plate to dry and said, "Your dad didn't always keep such careful books." When Walt was young, before me, he went into business with a friend he trusted like a brother. They shook hands instead of signing things. They ran the money together in one account because that's what trust looked like to him. And the friend cleaned him out, took the lot. There was nothing on paper to prove what was whose. He didn't lose the money so much as he lost the proof. My mother said it took him years to come back from it. And after that, he wrote everything down. Everything. That was where the green ledger came from. That was where money has a memory came from. It wasn't a quirk. It was a scar. My father had taught me to keep my world separate and documented, not because he was fussy, but because he had once lost everything to a handshake, and he was determined I never would. I dried the plate slowly. All those years, I'd thought the rule was about being organized. It was about being protected. My mother dried her hands on the towel and looked at me with my father's same level gaze. "Your father used to say something at the card table," she said. "He'd say, 'The loudest person sitting there usually owns the least.'" I laughed, a real laugh, the first in weeks, because I had just spent 2 months being outshouted by people who were betting everything they had, and I was beginning to suspect my father had been right about them too. Matilda laid the whole board out for me a week before the hearing, the way you'd explain a chessboard to someone who only ever played to survive. "Here's where we are," she said. "Their case has 3 legs. They want the company called marital. They want your inheritance called mingled. And they want the house and assets divided as marital property, which they actually are." She tapped each finger. "2 of those legs we kick out from under them. The company is separate. The inheritance is traceable, and your documents are airtight. But the house and the cars and the furniture, those are marital. And Marcus has every legal right to fight for his share." I nodded. "So, we fight for the house." Matilda tilted her head, watching me. "We can. It's a fight we could even win." I sat with that. Then I asked the question that had been forming since I'd pulled those mortgage records. "Matilda," I said slowly, "what is the house actually worth right now? After the refinance? After the line of credit he drained? After the loan he personally guaranteed against it?" She went very quiet. She pulled out the appraisal and the payoff figures and ran the numbers in front of me, and I watched her face change as the total landed. The equity in the house on Hemlock Lane was gone. Not low, gone. And then some, once you counted the debt strapped to it. The marital assets Marcus was fighting so hard to take were worth less than nothing. I leaned back in the chair. Somewhere in the back of my mind, my mother's voice said it again, "Let them carry the load they fought for." And for the first time, I understood exactly what she'd meant. The prize they wanted wasn't a prize. It was a trap, and they had built it themselves. I made Matilda walk me through it 3 times because it sounded too good, and I am a woman who distrusts numbers that sound too good. But it held. The house on Hemlock Lane, after Marcus's refinance and the home equity line he drained into Claire's flipping scheme, carried more debt than it was worth. Whoever won the house would inherit the mortgage, the line of credit, and the obligations attached to it. And the company. Marcus wanted half of Vance Accounting valued as a business, but Matilda pointed out the thing his cousin Walter had never grasped. A bookkeeping practice isn't a building or a brand. It's you. The clients stay because they trust Eleanor Vance, take you out of it, and what's left to value? A lease and some filing cabinets. Even if a judge somehow called the company marital, which the documents made nearly impossible, half of it without me running it was worth almost nothing. The clients would follow me out the door the same week. I sat in that small office and felt the whole architecture of their plan reveal itself beam by beam. They had spent months and legal fees and an entire town's goodwill fighting to take 3 things from me. The house, which was a sinkhole of debt. The company, which was worthless without the woman they were trying to take it from. And the children, which a guardian ad litem was already noting they barely knew. Everything Marcus was fighting to win was dollar for dollar everything that would sink him. He had aimed every weapon he owned directly at his own foot. And the most remarkable part, the part I keep coming back to even now, is that I hadn't laid a single trap. They'd done all of it to themselves. I'd only kept the receipts. It would be a nice story if the truth had set me free right then. It didn't. The town didn't know any of what I knew, and the gossip reached its high watermark in those last weeks. Patricia's version had hardened into fact through sheer repetition. I was the cold wife who'd hoarded money and pushed a good man out. I heard third hand that she'd repeated her little line about my maiden name at a women's circle to laughter. A friend I'd known since high school, a woman whose failing bakery I had personally kept solvent for 2 years, stopped returning my calls. That one I felt in my teeth. I could have fought back. I could have walked into that church basement with the certified mortgage records and the personal guarantee and shown them all exactly who was about to lose everything. Matilda advised against it, and I agreed. "Save the truth for the room where it counts," she said. "A courtroom, not a coffee klatch. You explain yourself to gossip, you've already lost." So I stayed quiet. I let them think what they thought. Silence, when you choose it on purpose, is a different thing than silence forced on you. But it nearly broke when Lily came home from school one day, climbed onto the couch, and told me very seriously that a girl in her class said we were going to lose our house and have to live in our car. I held her. I did not promise her the house, because I knew by then we'd be giving it up. Instead, I knelt down and made her a different promise, a specific one, looking right in her eyes. "We will always have a home," I said. "I built one once with nothing. I can do it again." She believed me. Now I had to make it true. The week before the hearing, Matilda and I built the file the way you'd build a wall, brick by brick, every brick certified. The deposit history with the bank's seal. The probate documents. The LC formation papers dated and filed before the marriage. 12 years of separate tax returns. The mortgage records and the refinance. The home equity line and Marcus's personal guarantee on the business loan. All of it pulled from public and joint records I had every right to. Not one piece of it was a secret recording, or a stolen text, or a diary I'd kept in the dark. Every single document was institutional, official, the kind a clerk stamps and a judge respects. My father's whole philosophy stacked in one folder. The day before, Matilda let me sit in the empty courtroom for a few minutes just to take the strangeness out of it. The room was cold. The old radiator along the wall clanked and hissed like something alive. The wooden benches were hard and chilly under my hands. My heart was going faster than I wanted it to. I sat and listened to that radiator clank and made myself breathe. Then Matilda told me the plan, the real plan, the one my mother had seen before either of us. "When they ask for the house," she said, "don't argue. When they ask for the marital assets, let them have them. Give them the fight they came for. Sign it over." I must have looked at her like she was mad because she smiled just slightly. "Trust me, Eleanor. The worst thing we can do to these people is let them win exactly what they asked for." I looked at the cold, empty judge's bench and felt for the first time something close to calm. I finally understood my mother's 2 words. I just hadn't heard her say them yet. They made one last play before the hearing, and it told me everything about what they were really after. Walter reached out with a settlement offer, presented as generosity. If I would simply sign over my interest in the business to be divided, they'd go easy on the spousal support, maybe even let me keep the smaller car. It was dressed up as a kindness. It was a trap with a bow on it. Because the company was already mine, free and clear, separate property the law would protect. The only way it could ever become marital, ever get split, was if I voluntarily signed it into the marital pot myself. They couldn't take it. They needed me to give it. They wanted my signature far more than they wanted the truth. And once I saw that, I saw all the way to the bottom of them. At the meeting, Walter slid the papers across the table and, with a little performance of reasonableness, said it would help if I'd hand over the office keys as a gesture of good faith while things were sorted out. I reached into my purse out of pure habit, and my fingers closed around the brass key, the worn one, smooth from 12 years of 5:45 a.m. mornings. I set my hand on the table. And then I stopped. I drew my hand back, key still closed in my fist, and I said very politely, "No, just that." Walter's smile flickered. He hadn't expected the quiet ones to say no. I left the papers unsigned on the table and walked out with my key in my pocket. I understood finally exactly which of us was bluffing. The whole house of cards depended on me being too tired or too scared to read what they handed me. They had picked the wrong bookkeeper. So I made my decision, and it was the opposite of what everyone expected. I would not fight for the house. I would not contest a single piece of the marital property they were so hungry for. I would let them have all of it. The house on Hemlock Lane with its drained equity and its strangled mortgage, the furniture, the cars, the whole shining pile of debt with a bow on it. What I would not do, ever, was sign away the company or pretend my inheritance was anything other than what the records proved. And I would fight with everything I had for Lily and Sam. That was the line. Matilda confirmed it was sound. You give up the marital assets, which are underwater, and you protect the separate property, which is solid, and you focus the custody fight on stability, which you've got in spades. It was strategy disguised as surrender. It was my mother's whisper before I'd even heard it. The load they fought for, handed to them gift-wrapped. I won't pretend I wasn't afraid. Walking into a courtroom planning to give away the house your children grew up in is a strange and lonely kind of brave. The night before, I sat at my mother's kitchen table, not my own anymore, with the green ledger open to my father's handwriting. And I read those two words again. Separate, traceable, my whole defense, written by a dead man who'd been burned once and swore his daughter never would be. I was about to walk into that room and hand the Vances their prize, smiling while they laughed. And the only person on earth besides Matilda who understood why I was smiling was the woman who'd raised me. Tomorrow, she would lean over and say it out loud. And I would finally be ready to hear it. I didn't sleep much the night before the hearing. I lay in the spare room at my mother's house, the kids breathing softly down the hall, and I rehearsed staying calm. That was the whole job. Matilda had told me not to win the argument, but to let them win the argument and lose the war. I practiced the flat, polite voice I'd use, the one that gives an opponent nothing to grab. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen and opened the green ledger one more time. My father's handwriting studied me the way it always had, the careful columns, the dates, the single words separate standing guard over 5 years of an account nobody had been able to touch. I ran my thumb over the brass office key on my ring. I thought about Lily on the couch, asking if we'd live in a car, and the promise I'd made her, we will always have a home. I made things add up for a living. I knew how to start with nothing and build something real because I'd done it once already in a garage with a sticky calculator. I could do it again. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't afraid anymore. Or not only afraid, I was ready. I wasn't going to walk into that courtroom and try to be louder than the Vances or angrier or crueler. My father had told me how that table ends. I was going to walk in quiet and right and prepared, with a folder full of certified truth and a key in my pocket. and I was going to let them shout themselves all the way into the hole they'd spent 2 months digging. I just had to keep my hands steady and my voice low. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like floor wax and cold coffee. The Vances were already there, and they were not nervous. They were celebrating early. Patricia sat ramrod straight in her good coat, holding court even there. Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man about to collect a check. Claire had come, of all the nerve, and she was murmuring something to Marcus behind her hand. I caught the word curtains again, and I almost laughed. Walter shuffled his papers with the confidence of a man who hadn't read them closely. The old radiator in the hallway clanked and hissed, that same living rattle, and the wooden bench was cold through my dress when I sat to wait. My heart was loud. I focused on the radiator, on the rhythm of it, the way you'd focus on a metronome, and I made my breathing match it, slow and even. My mother sat beside me. She took my hand. Her fingers were warm and dry and steady, and she leaned close, so close her breath stirred my hair, and she whispered the 2 words that had frozen me in the same hallway, the ones I'd been circling for weeks without understanding. Give her everything. That was it. Just that. Give Claire. Give Patricia. Give Marcus. Give the whole laughing lot of them everything they'd come to take. And in that second, with my mother's warm hand around mine, and my father's ledger packed in the folder on my lap, and the radiator clanking like a heartbeat, I finally understood her completely. She wasn't telling me to lose. She was telling me to let them win the exact thing that would ruin them. The doors opened. A bailiff called the case. I stood, smoothed my navy dress, and walked in to do precisely what my mother said. I gave them everything. That was the first move, and it landed like a gift, exactly as Matilda had promised. When the judge turned to the matter of the marital home, Walter launched into his rehearsed demand, ready for a fight. I simply nodded to Matilda, who rose and said, in a bored, almost generous tone, that my client did not contest the marital home and would sign over her interest in it entirely. Walter stopped mid-sentence. He'd loaded a cannon to knock down a door that was already open. Marcus looked at his mother. Patricia's face cracked into something that was almost a smile. We went down the list item by item, and at each one, Matilda waved a hand. The cars, the furniture, the appliances, the contents of the house on Hemlock Lane, the savings account, drained as it was, every piece of the visible, shining pile they had spent months and a town's goodwill fighting for, I signed away with a steady hand and a calm face. And with every signature, the Vances grew more openly delighted. Patricia actually reached over and squeezed Marcus's arm. Claire, in the gallery, sat up straighter, already redecorating. They thought I was broken. They thought the cold, calculating wife had finally crumbled, so beaten down by the gossip and the pressure that she was giving up without a fight. I let them think it. I kept my eyes down and my pen moving, the picture of a defeated woman doing the only thing left to her. The only thing I held back was the company. And when Walter tried to fold it into the settlement, Matilda produced the LLC documents, dated and certified, and the judge glanced at them and moved on without comment because there was nothing there to argue. Through all of it, I kept one hand in my lap, and in that hand, hidden, I held the brass key to my office, smooth and warm now from my grip. They could have the house they could see. They could not have the thing I'd built, because that was never theirs to take. They signed the agreement before anyone read the appraisal. They signed before the debt figures were entered into the record. They signed in triumph. All 3 of them, practically beaming. That was the whole plan. and the plan was just getting started. Then, Matilda stood up to address the financial record, and the temperature in the room began to change. She spoke quietly, almost kindly, the way you'd explain a hard truth to someone you didn't entirely dislike. First, she submitted the certified deposit history for my inheritance account, 5 years of it, sealed by the bank, every dollar traceable to my father's estate, and never once mingled with marital funds. Under state law, she noted, separate property kept traceable remains separate, and the burden of proving it was met right there in black and white. The judge reviewed it and nodded. The inheritance was mine, untouchable, exactly as it had always been. Second, the company, the single-member LLC formed before the marriage, with 12 years of independent books. Separate, mine. Walter shifted in his seat. Then, Matilda turned to the marital home, the one the Vances had just so eagerly accepted, and she entered into the record the refinance documents, the home equity line of credit Marcus had drained months before filing, and the appraisal showing the property's current value. The numbers were read aloud. The equity was gone. And then the last document, the one that did it, the personal guarantee Marcus had signed on the business loan funding Claire's flipping venture, securing the debt against himself and against the very house he had just been awarded. Matilda set it down and folded her hands. "Your Honor," she said, "my client has agreed to assume the marital home and all associated obligations. We have no objection." The silence in that room was total. I watched it move across their faces like a shadow crossing a field. Walter grabbed the appraisal and read it, and his confident expression collapsed inward. Marcus leaned over his shoulder, and I watched the color leave his face as he understood finally that the house he'd fought for was an anchor, that the debt he'd hidden so cleverly was now his alone, secured by his own signature, attached to a property worth less than what was owed on it. He had won every single thing he asked for. He had won a mountain of debt with his own name guaranteeing it. I sat with my hands folded and my voice unused because I had not needed to say a word. My mother's 2 words were already doing all the talking. Give her everything. They had taken it eagerly, gratefully on the record before they read what was attached. The judge looked over the top of his glasses at the Vance side of the room. And then, into that perfect silence, my mother-in-law started to shout. Patricia came apart in a way I had never once seen in 64 composed, pie-baking, pew-sitting years. She was on her feet before the judge could finish a sentence, her sweet church voice gone, replaced by something raw and ugly. She turned on Walter first, demanding to know how he'd let this happen, why he hadn't seen it, what she was paying him for. Walter stammered something about disclosure and timelines, gathering papers that wouldn't gather. Then, she turned on Marcus, her own son, and the things she said to him were worse than anything she'd ever whispered about me. Because they were true, and they were cruel, and they were in front of everyone. He'd been careless. He'd been led around by that woman. He'd cost the family the house and saddled himself with a debt no Vance could carry. Marcus, for his part, spun toward the gallery, looking for Claire, the partner whose venture had eaten the equity, the woman who told him the house would be theirs. And Claire was already on her feet, already moving toward the doors, her face shut like a bank after closing. The judge banged his gavel and called for order, and the bailiff stepped forward, and the whole Vance side of the room dissolved into the kind of public scene Patricia had spent 2 months accusing me of being capable of. I sat perfectly still through all of it. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice, not once, because there was nothing left to say that the documents hadn't already said better. When the room finally quieted, the judge moved to the matter of the children. The guardian ad litem's report was plain. Through every month of this, one parent had kept the kids' lives steady, their school the same, their routines unbroken, while the other had offered ponies and lived increasingly out of a suitcase with a woman the children had met twice. Custody went to me, primary and clear, with a standard visitation schedule for Marcus. I felt my chest unlock quietly, the way a held breath finally lets go. Lily and Sam were mine to keep safe. I'd promised her a home, and now I could build one. I had said almost nothing in that courtroom. I hadn't needed to. Everything that mattered, I'd said years ago in a green ledger at a kitchen table, in my father's careful hand. The loudest people at the table, it turned out, had owned the least all along. Claire didn't make it to the parking lot before it ended. I saw it through the hallway windows as I gathered my things, that worn old radiator still clanking beside me. She'd cornered Marcus just outside, and whatever he was saying, she wasn't staying to hear it. The house she'd helped him fight for was an underwater debt now, and a man tied to a guaranteed loan he couldn't pay was not the asset she'd come for. She'd spent her whole adult life learning to read the difference between a man with money and a man with the appearance of it. And she read Marcus clean through in about 30 seconds. She walked to her car without looking back. Her great fear, the one she'd named to me in a parking lot, the terror of reaching her age with nothing, had just become her own doing, chosen with her eyes open, exactly as I'd suspected it would. Then Patricia found me in the hallway. The composure was back, hastily reassembled, the church voice trying to return. She wanted to talk. She wondered, in that reasonable tone, whether we might revisit some of this, whether I'd really want the house and its troubles, whether we couldn't come to a family arrangement. I looked at the woman who had stood in a church basement and told a whole town I'd be lucky to keep my maiden name. I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the brass key one more time, and I felt finally completely calm. "No, Patricia," I said gently, the way you'd correct a child. "I'm keeping what I built. You can keep what you fought for." Then I picked up my folder, took my mother's arm, and walked toward the doors, the radiator clanking behind us like applause. My mother was waiting at the top of the courthouse steps in the thin gold light of a cold afternoon. We didn't cheer. We didn't hug and weep the way they do in movies. That isn't who we are. She just looked at me, and I looked at her, and she gave one small nod, the kind that says everything a whole speech couldn't. I thought about my father and the handshake that had cleaned him out, and the ledger he'd kept every day after as a kind of prayer that his daughter would never know that particular flavor of loss. I'd kept his rule my whole life without needing it. Today it had stood between me and ruin like a wall he'd built 50 years before I ever needed shelter behind it. Behind us, faintly, I could still hear the Vances arguing in the marble hallway, the sound thinning as the doors swung shut. Ahead of us, 2 kids waited at my mother's house with a hallway lamp left on. I took the first step down and then the next. I had walked into that courthouse ready to lose everything. I was walking out having kept the only things that were ever truly mine. The rest came the way real consequences come, slowly, and then all at once. Within 8 months, Marcus couldn't carry the house on Hemlock Lane and the loan strapped to it. The bank started the paperwork, and the home where my children took their first steps went up for a short sale, sold to strangers for less than the debt against it. The personal guarantee he'd signed followed him out the door and into his credit and his future, a number that would shadow him for years. Claire had already gone on to whatever came next. The venture folded. The partnership dissolved. And Patricia, who had run her quiet campaign through the church kitchen and the women's circle, found that small towns have long memories and a sharp sense for who is actually in the wrong. Once the dust settled, the casserole slowed. The pew beside her emptied a little. People are not stupid forever. As for me, I kept the office with my name on the glass door. The clients who drifted during the gossip drifted back, a little sheepish. And I took them on without a word about it because a grudge is just another debt, and I decided not to carry that one. Within the year, I bought a small house on the east side of town, 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, paid for with my own separate, traceable money. Lily picked the paint for her room. Sam claimed the yard for a future dog. I left a lamp on in the hallway every night, the way I always had, and for the first time in a long time, the home it lit was entirely, unmistakably ours. People in town still ask me about it sometimes, carefully, the way you ask about a wound you're not sure has healed. They ask if I lost everything in that divorce, the house, the marriage, the standing. And I always tell them the same thing, because it's the truth, and because I've earned the right to enjoy it just a little. I gave her everything. The house, the cars, the whole bright pile she'd already started decorating in her head. I signed it all over with a smile. She just had no idea what everything was actually going to cost her. I keep my boundaries with the Vances polite and firm. Marcus sees the kids on schedule. We do not discuss curtains. My mother-in-law once told a room full of people that I'd be lucky to keep my maiden name. I think about that line more than I should because of how it turned out. The name Vance is still on the glass door of my office downtown, a little brighter than it used to be since I had the lettering redone. It's the name on my children's school forms, on the deed to a house I paid for myself, on the ledger my father handed me at 16. I didn't just keep my maiden name, I kept everything that name was ever attached to. She wanted my house. I gave her my debt. Here's the only thing I learned worth passing on. Walking out with less in your hands doesn't mean walking out with less. Not if what's left is finally fully yours. That's my story. One sentence my mother whispered. One ledger my father taught me to keep. And a courtroom full of people who fought to win a debt. If this reminded you that quiet and documented beats loud and certain, take it as a sign. Keep your own records. Keep your own name. If you know a woman who needs to hear this, share it. Keep your own records, keep your own name, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one right here on Unveiled Stories.